Okay, hello everyone. I'm Joanna Adams. I'm here with my colleague Lesley Macrae. We are from the Open Research team based in the library, and today we're going to give you an overview of open research. So we'll cover all the main areas of the service that we offer. So we are based in the library. Now, open is embedded in everything that we do. Our aim is to make sure that our authors get the credit they deserve for their work and to make sure that the work has the widest possible reach to increase your impact. And we are a pillar around which a new sustainable model should go. We'll do that through advocacy, partnerships, infrastructure, and support. Now, this is our team. You can see there are quite a few of us, and we all have responsibilities for different areas of open research, but we all work together. And we are here to help you throughout the research life cycle. So from your initial idea, generation and planning, right through to publication and dissemination. Although we're based in the library, we also work in partnership with other teams in the library and throughout the Directorate of Digital and Information Services. Now, my speciality is open access, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So open access just means that your research is free for anyone to read and download online. And that should be without barriers such as payment or embargoes. And there are many benefits to making your research open access. Really, the more people that see your work, the better. You'll get higher citation rates, and people like practitioners, policymakers, the public can all access your research and apply your findings. You will be compliant with any grant rules that apply to you. Taxpayers get value for their money through your funders, and researchers in developing countries who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford access will also be able to read your work. Now, there are two main routes to open access. You can either publish the final version of records immediately on the publisher website or platform, which is known as gold or diamond open access, or you can deposit a version of the manuscripts in an institutional or subject repository. That is known as green open access. Now, either way, they will be freely available for anyone to read, and they should be published under a license that allows sharing and reuse. The gold open access typically requires a payment. That could be an article processing charge, either paid by your funder or it might be covered by an institutional agreement, but it means it's free for anyone to read. Diamond also means that it's free for anyone to read, but there's no cost to the author, or the publication costs are usually absorbed by the publisher, who would be probably a university or a society press. Green open access, there is no cost to read and also no cost to publish, but it is usually the unformatted, peer-reviewed, accepted manuscripts that you can deposit in the repository, and the published version will remain behind a paywall, only available to people who have a subscription to that journal. Now, when you're choosing where to publish, it's quite important that you understand the different models of publication. So you've got your hybrid model, which is a subscription journal. The institution pays for their members to read, but authors can pay an article processing charge, or APC, to publish selected articles open access. Now, they might be covered by an institutional agreement, or you might have to find the funds through your institution or your funder. But you can deposit the accepted manuscript for non-open access in the institutional repository, and that's the green open access. So if you can't go the gold open access route, you can take the green. Then you've got your fully open access journals, where all of the articles are open access, and that's when you pay the article processing charge to publish. although some of our institutional agreements with publishers do include fully open access journals as well. And you've got your diamond open access, which again, all the articles are open access, but there's no APC, so you don't pay to publish. The costs are covered by the publisher. Now, it's really important that you make your publications open access, and that is for the benefits that we already mentioned. You might be required to by your funder. And for REF, most of us need to make our research outputs open to be eligible for submission to the next REF exercise. And there is a tool called rights retention that allows authors to keep the rights to their accepted manuscripts when you're publishing green open access. Now, rights retention is simple to apply. All you have to do is include this sentence with any submission that you make. So for the purpose of open access, the author has applied, insert the open license of your choice to any author accepted manuscript version arising. And what you're doing with this is just making it clear to the publisher at the time that you submit your manuscript that you will be making that accepted manuscript open access immediately on publication under an open license. We recommend that you apply it to all of your submissions, even if you think, I'm published in a fully open access journal. You might not be accepted by your first choice. You might be passed to another journal which doesn't have an open access route. So the rights retention just means that you've covered all your bases. And by applying that, you'll be automatically compliant with funder and REF open access policies. The university also introduced the new University Research Publications Policy in May last year, and that supports rights retention. If you are not familiar with the Creative Commons licenses, they are just a suite of licenses that the author applies to their work, and they set out the terms of how your research can be reused. So we've got the CC-BY, which is the license usually mandated by funders, and the one that we recommend. It allows the most reuse of your work, but always with credit given to the creator of the work. So CC-BY allows your work to be shared, reused, adapted. You may want to share your work, but not for commercial purposes, in which case you can use the NC. Or you might want to share, but you don't want any changes to be made, in which case you can use the no derivatives. But if you do have a funder open access policy that you need to comply with, make sure that you check which licenses you are allowed to use. Now, these are the main funders that we deal with in terms of open access policies, but there are others. So if you have got external funding from any other organisation, check your contract for the terms and conditions. And if you're not sure, just get in touch with us. The funder open access requirements vary between funders, but typically they require immediate open access, and that can either be through the gold route, where the version of record is made open, or by depositing accepted manuscripts in the institutional repository, which is your green route. Biomedical researchers might also be required to deposit in PubMed Central. Again, just check your funder terms and conditions. Typically, funders will no longer pay APCs in the hybrid journals. They will only pay for fully open access journals, but there are many hybrid journals now that are covered by an institutional publisher agreement. So remember to use the rights retention statement for hybrid journals to make sure that you can make your accepted manuscripts open access, and typically they will require the CC-BY license for either the green or the gold route. There are no embargoes permitted any longer. You should include a data access statement just explaining how to access the associated research materials with your publication. And while preprints are not required to be open, it is encouraged. Now, the open access requirements for journal articles and conference papers have been in place for quite a long time, but more recently, funders have extended their open access requirements to long-form publications, which includes monographs, chapters, edited collections. And similar to the requirements for articles, they must be open access, either through the version of record or deposit in the accepted manuscript in a repository. You are allowed an embargo. It can be open within 12 months of publication. And again, the CC-BY license is preferred, but you have got a choice. You might use one of the other ones. And as I said, each funder is slightly different, so make sure that you know the requirements before submission. You should check what your journal or your publisher will allow. There are some open access funds, depending on your funder. Some of them might require you to apply in your research grant for open access. Some of them will provide a block grant, which we have from UKRI, Wellcome and the British Heart Foundation. These funds are really limited. They don't cover all of the research that is published through that funder. So if you are thinking about publishing in a fully open access journal that requires a payment to publish, please get in touch with the Open Research team at a really early stage and make sure that you have got that funding. And the funding for monographs is slightly different. Again, just get in touch with us and we will keep you right on that. I've mentioned the REF. Hopefully you all know what that is, but if not, it's a massive funding exercise that takes place every 8 years or so. The last one was REF 2021, and we are now getting ready to prepare for REF 2029. And it determines the amount of research funding that we get from the government bodies. So it's really important to the university. The open access requirements for REF are under review at the moment. There is a consultation just come out this week, so look out for further information being circulated on that. But for the moment, you need to make your publications, journal articles, and conference proceedings open access as soon after acceptance as possible. And we really recommend that you just use the rights retention statement and follow the sort of funder open access policies, and that will make sure that you're compliant either way. But any questions about that, please do just get in touch. Now, I've mentioned the publisher open access agreements. We have got agreements with most of the big publishers now where corresponding authors affiliated to the University of Aberdeen can publish open access either at no cost or through a discounted APC. They are sometimes also known as transitional agreements or read and publish. And the way they work is that the publisher identifies you as an eligible corresponding author by your affiliation. So we recommend that you use your University of Aberdeen email address wherever possible. They typically apply to research and review articles. Other types like book reviews or short communications may not be included. They don't cover every journal. Some of the agreements like Elsevier only cover the hybrid journals. Others like Wiley cover hybrid and fully open access. So do check on our web pages or get in touch with us if you're not sure if your journal is covered. So once they've recognised you as an eligible author, they'll offer you open access and you just follow the instructions. If you're offered a choice of Creative Commons licence, we always recommend the CC-BY. And we are aware that there are some issues for researchers, particularly postgrads who have left the university by the time they come to publication. So in that case, just try and contact us as early as possible and we will try and advise on that. Now, our systems supporting open access at Aberdeen are PURE, which is the university's research information system. And it's really important that you record all of your research outputs here. That will mean that we can make sure that they're eligible for REF. We'll make them open access. You can also include your other related research activities. we would ask that you edit your own Pure account for them. But whenever you have an article accepted for publication, if you email paper accepted with a copy of the accepted manuscript, our team will upload that to Pure on your behalf. And there are also some automated imports available as well. ORA is our institutional repository, and that is where the full text or your accepted manuscripts, published articles where allowed, are made freely available, and they're sent through from Pure. You can also see all of the research information on the Pure Research portal. So you can see the publications, datasets, activities, awards, and networks all there. It's like a giant CV for the university where all of the research is shown. And if you have set the publications to display on your staff web pages, then that information also comes from Pure. So you can see how important it is that you keep your information up to date on Pure. Now, one last thing for me is think, check, submit. Unfortunately, with the rise of open access and paying for publication, there are some predatory or questionable publishers that will charge you for services that they either can't or won't provide. So this checklist is just a tool that helps you assess the quality of a publication before you decide to submit and to pay for publication. And we have been made aware recently that predatory conferences are also on the rise. And there is a checklist for that called Think, Check and Attend. So it's a really good idea, especially for people who are maybe new to publications or you've not been to a conference before, just to ask yourself these few questions and make sure that you're don't become a victim of a scam. Okay, now I'm going to pass over to Lesley.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, go back, about open data. And to begin with, so a question that I'm sometimes asked when talking about data sharing is the data actually mine to share? And who actually owns this data? So I'm just going to go over that quickly before I begin. So the answer is yes, it is considered to be your data, as long as you're not making any commercial gains from it. If there's any commercialization, then the institution would redeem rights for it. So this would be the same with software. If there's any commercial gain from any software that you've made at the university, then it would invoke rights, unless of course it's open source software created for teaching purposes, like those open educational resources. As in those cases, the university will waive ownership rights so that they can be made open. And sometimes also asked about third-party data sharing. So sharing third-party data or images or tables that you might have used in your publications. Again, check the licenses to see if the license allows you to archive or share those. If it doesn't, then all is not lost. You can keep detailed documentation of how you access these images or tables and share those details rather than share the data or image itself. So moving on from that. Okay, so moving on, why share your data? Often and increasingly, it's a funder requirement, but sharing your data will make sure it's transparent and easily scrutinised and to help gain that public trust and impact. It'll make it easy to reuse and build upon. So someone might pick up a study that you've been working on and take it further. And I've also heard people say that it's a really useful exercise for early career researchers to pick up a study and to try and replicate it using the data and methods provided. It also means that you'll be open. That means that you are open to collaboration, especially if you do a really good job of citing and sharing your data set information. This can boost your CV. And it cuts down on the time, the admin and the frustration of dealing with data requests that you might get from people that you don't have time to deal with. And that works both ways. If you contact somebody looking for their data and they don't get back to you, it can be really frustrating. So most of these funders that I've mentioned on this slide ask for a data management plan. Here at this university, we use DMP Online as a data management tool, and we have staff in digital research that can answer questions and provide support on things like data storage and data management plans. Most funders ask that data is stored for at least 10 years after a project, so it's really important to get in touch with them at the beginning of a project. The data management plan is a living document that can be changed and updated as your research progresses. So as I said before, as far as data sharing goes, it's really important to check your funder requirements. UKRI funders like EPSRC have funder policies around making your data open and available in a timely manner as soon as you make your publication available. NIH launched a new policy at the beginning of last year, and they ask that as a minimum scientific data is shared at the time of publication. So in the United States last year, there were some really bold changes, which might also come to influence how things are done over here. There was the Nelson memo published by the OSTP at the White House, and they announced that by 2025, all publicly funded research would need to make associated data free and immediately accessible. So things are kind of going in that direction. So what to share? This is general advice, so for now I'm focusing on human data, but data varies across disciplines. For example, in humanities, things like interviews and focus groups. Most human research data can be shared if managed properly with consent, anonymisation and rights management. So we've got human data. We've got a great team in the university and information governance dealing with GDPR, and it's important to contact them if you have any doubts. But anonymising data can make it shareable and make sure that it can't be re-identified. And again, it's always best to check with the funder themselves if they have any rules regarding the data that you're going to be making available. So consent, as well as informing about how the data will be stored and used, you also need to inform participants about how it will be kept confidential in the long term. I've included a link to a form that can be used for seeking consent for different types of data sharing. And anonymisation. So this minimises the risk of leaking personally identifiable information, and it allows the data to be usable without distorting it. And finally, access. It is sometimes necessary to shield or to safeguard data and not to make it available. And I know that this can sometimes seem like an awful lot of work on top of everything else that researchers are asked to do. But as a case study, I was listening to a talk recently from a lady who was involved in research and who talked about a data set that she had created. So it was a data set created around information from sex workers during COVID. And she talked about how it was really difficult to access that group. They were part of a group that are probably over-surveyed. Surveys can be expensive to set up and difficult to carry out. But in this case, the data set that she created was really highly downloaded and became very useful to other researchers. And so she talked about it as an example of a data set that was really hugely worthwhile to put in the work and effort into the anonymisation and to making it freely available. So I'll go on to talk about making data complete and reusable, but first I just wanted to share a slide on FAIR, which is an acronym that's often used when talking about open data. And don't be alarmed by the amount of words on this slide. There is a huge amount of information there, but we're not asking you to tick every single box. So I'll just go over each one quickly, and if you can do one or two things to begin with, then that's a great place to start. So it's really about making data findable for both humans and computers, and that can be using things like DOIs or other persistent identifiers, using these to cite our data sets. And once you have that DOI, sharing it whenever you talk about your work at a conference or when you write about it, that can really increase the findability of your data set. Making it accessible. not enough just to put the data somewhere. It needs to be accompanied by clear instructions for access. Can be something as fancy as protocols.io or something as basic as a README file with a really good description of your data set in it. And as far as interoperable goes, you can store your data, you should store your data in a format that's compatible with other data or tools. And I'll talk about those open formats in another slide. And finally, to make it reusable, it should be suitably described to allow further use. Most online repositories will give options to use Creative Commons licenses, but there are other licenses that apply to data. And again, I'll link to those in a future slide. So preparing your data for sharing. As I said, you can use tools like protocols.io, which are really prescriptive in terms of methodology, and they're almost like creating a recipe for your data with step-by-step instructions that someone can follow to completely reenact your research. But however you create that data description, you should provide clear and transparent documentation. This includes analysis, code, and scripts where necessary. And repositories like OSF will allow you to organize your file structure with your code, with your data dictionaries, and then something like OSF will also allow you add-ons. So if you have information in GitHub, you can add that to your OSF data repository so that everything's there. As I said, it's really important to use open file types where possible and to convert them where you can. You can ask a friend or a colleague to review or look over your data description just as a kind of quality control. And check how easily it can be downloaded, can the files be accessed, what fields have you used, and have you described the units. Some subjects will also use things like controlled vocabulary. So that's why I've popped in this little image of Lego. So every piece in a Lego set has a defined code or name, which makes it really easy to create instructions for Lego and makes it really easy to use those pieces. And it's similar when talking about data. If there's a control taxonomy, it just means that it's easier to create instructions for somebody to reuse that in the future. So as a minimum, when you deposit your data, here's what we would ask you to include. And again, it may seem time consuming, but it's useful to think about yourself trying to navigate somebody else's data and being able to use it without contacting them. So a title, creator, using that DOI, details of your funder, any access information. So most repositories will let you include embargoes if you don't want your data to be immediately available. Information about your project and funder, and subject, things like subject keywords are really useful, and they can be specific to your subject or more general, which would create more access. So again, when it comes to choosing your repository to put your data in, it's really important to check funder requirements. Some funders will specify the use of a disciplinary repository and have quite clear expectations. For example, in geosciences, seismology data is stored in IRIS, and those are really huge, large models which need that kind of system and specialist advice and service. You can ask colleagues, use forums within your discipline to see what's popular within your discipline. In psychology, OSF has become really popular, and I think that's mainly through word of mouth and because it suits their needs. And it also has a pre-registration capability, which I'll mention more about. We don't have an institutional sign-in for any of these repositories, but they are all really easy to sign up to, and almost all are free. I think Dryad's the only one that has a charge. There's a link here in this slide, the AGU link, which will just take you to a table which will discuss the differences and the kind of options of the different repositories available and the different things that they offer. And there are new repositories being created all the time. Somebody told me about ResearchBox the other day and I hadn't heard about it before. So you might even find a new one. Once you've deposited your data in a repository, share the URL you've created. And for example, OSF creates a short link for each user's page. Share that at conferences, share it in papers, share it in social media. And the more you share it, the more it's likely to be viewed. And Joanna's talked a bit about Pure when she was talking about research outputs. Pure can also be used to store data, but there are size limitations. So what we generally advise researchers to do is to store the data in an external repository, but to also fill in dataset information in Pure, just so that we have the information about your dataset and a link to it. And then that can be added to your researcher profile so that everything's available in that sort of gigantic CV that Joanna was talking about. So licensing code and data, we would always recommend the most open license possible when sharing data, which would be CC0, as that allows reuse without limitations. The share-alike restriction would reduce that interoperability, and the non-derivative would restrict reuse. When licensing code, so there's licenses that go from proprietary right through to copyleft, more open licenses. And the next slide gives some useful information on these different licenses and the options available. So this slide just is a sort of really useful one that I've found, just for looking at the different options available, whether you want to make your data your code more openly available, or whether you want to restrict it in some way. I just wanted to pop a quick slide in here about pre-registration as well. This is something that's becoming popular tool, and many researchers are finding it useful. So pre-registration is really about setting out key study details before the experiments in your research commence, and the pre-registering will give you a time-stamped, time and date stamped document pre-research beginning. The two main pre-registration facilities that I've heard mainly of, and again there may be others, are As Predicted and the OSF pre-registration facility. As Predicted links to that repository that I was mentioning earlier called ResearchBox, and OSF pre-registration is affiliated with the OSF repository. So pre-registration makes the distinction between what you set out to do and what you encounter once you begin your research. It doesn't mean that you can't discuss unanticipated results. You can, but you have to just make sure that those are transparently documented and labelled as unanticipated results that you haven't previously registered in your pre-registration. It's all about transparency of intentions and of methods and of outcomes. And again, it may be possible to have this submitted to a journal and peer reviewed to create something called a registered report. And then you would subsequently publish the findings in that journal. So it really prevents things like harking or hypothesizing after the results are known, dredging for significant results in your data. And it just, again, makes everything transparent. And it is something that seems to be becoming increasingly popular. So moving on from that, I'm just going to quickly mention a little bit about research metrics. So we have a metrics advisor in our team, in the open research team based in the library. And there's a link below to an Explore session that she recorded earlier this year, which gives a lot more detail on the responsible use of metrics. So we have access to things in the institution like Scopus and Web of Science, and Francesca would be able to guide you on how best to use those to extract any metrics information. So metrics really can be used to measure the visibility of your research, find trends in it. It can also be used to identify potential collaborators, which is a really useful function, and identifying journals or sources that most suit your research. And this slide is really about keeping in mind the limitations of metrics as a measure of quality in papers. So there's a link here to DORA, which was the first formal movement against the use of the impact factor as a measure for assessing researchers and their work. So metrics should never be used as a shortcut, but always in the context and always used responsibly. Should never be used, as I said, as a sole assessment of the quality of research or out of context, but should be used as a unique measure to evaluate an individual or institution's performance, or shouldn't be used to value an individual or institution's performance. I just wanted to remind everyone to keep your researcher profile on Pure up to date. As Joanna said earlier, this is the best window into your research for anyone that wants to find it. So there are guides below on how to do this. Check out our how-to guides in the link. And these will show you how to connect your Pure profile to Scopus and to PubMed and to Web of Science, and the information will flow between these. And also, Francesca's included a slide here on ORCID, which is really important. If you don't have one, we would really encourage you to sign up for an ORCID. It's really quick and easy to do. It guards against if you move institutions, if you change your name. It just means that in the future, all your research will be correctly traced back to you. And again, there's an Explore session to explain more about this, and we have guides on how to set up an ORCID. So something that we would really encourage you to do. I'm just going to pass back over to Joanna, and she's going to talk a little bit about our university press.
Okay, so AUP, Aberdeen University Press, has got a long history. It was set up in 1840 and registered as a public company in 1900. The press thrived through much of the 20th century, printing educational and local interest books and journals, including some quite important works. Nan Shepherd's Tribute to the Cairngorms, The Living Mountain, which is quite well known. That was in 1977. But like many university presses, it closed in the 1990s. It was relaunched by the Research Institute of Irish and Scottish Studies, or RISE, in 2013, and it has been publishing print journals and monographs with some open access content since then. But in 2019, AUP joined the Open Research team, based here in the library, and we launched an open access platform in 2022. And you can find the link here. As the open access landscape evolves, there is now becoming a crucial role for university presses as they work to create a more open system of scholarly communication. And AUP is an important part of that. So AUP and how it fits into open research. It is a really important part of the university's open research capability, and it supports a research culture that encourages openness, also aligns with the Aberdeen 2040 strategy and our foundational statement of open to all and dedicated to the pursuit of truth in the service of others. AUP publishes high quality open access research across all disciplines and fields of inquiry, and it's worldwide. It's not just limited to members of Aberdeen University. And as well as publishing primary research, the press also encourages works of synthesis, which are multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary in their approach. And a key part of the press's commitment to openness is the aim to be a diamond open access publisher. And that, if you remember, is when there are no charges to authors for publication or for anyone to read. The costs will be supported by the press using a variety of funding models. AUP is also a member of OIPA, the Open Institutional Publishing Association, which is a body that supports and sets standards for small to medium-sized university presses that are striving to be open access. Okay, so that is us. We will stop recording now and I'll stop sharing our screen. If you have any questions, we can take some just now, but we've also got a lot of information on our web pages, which you'll find here. And as Lesley mentioned, we have had Explore training sessions, which have all been made available on YouTube, and they're on a variety of different subjects to do with open access.